Hello and welcome. Find a quiet harbor, drop your anchor, and listen to the sound of the water. Tonight, we are not going to a haunted house, a cursed forest, or a lonely road. We are traveling to an island. There is something profoundly and uniquely isolating about an island. It is a world unto itself, a patch of land held captive by the water that surrounds it. This liquid boundary serves as more than just a physical barrier. It is a psychological one. It separates the island's reality from the reality of the mainland. An island can be a paradise, a tropical haven of sun, sand, and escape. Or it can be a prison, a place of exile, a final destination from which there is no return. An island is what we make it. A place to keep things in or a place to keep things out. Tonight, we are visiting an island that has, throughout its long and blood-soaked history, been both. It has been a place designed to keep the healthy out, and a place designed to ensure the sick never, ever get back in. We are visiting an island so saturated with human suffering, so steeped in a history of plague, madness, and death, that it is considered by many to be one of the most haunted, most malevolent places on the face of the earth. It is a place so feared that for generations, local fishermen have refused to cast their nets in its waters, for fear of pulling up not fish, but human bones. It is an island that is strictly off-limits to visitors, a place that the Italian government would seemingly prefer the world to forget. We are traveling to the Venetian lagoon, to a small, unassuming, and completely forbidden patch of land that lies between the shimmering beauty of Venice and the golden beaches of the Lido. Its name is Poveglia. From a distance, it looks deceptively peaceful, even picturesque. A collection of decaying, rust-colored buildings half swallowed by a riot of overgrown vines, their windows like hollow, vacant eyes. A lonely bell tower, a campanile, reaches towards the sky like a skeletal finger, a silent monument to a history of horrors. But this is not an island of quiet, gentle decay. This is an island of violent, malevolent energy. It is a place where the very soil is said to be composed of 50% human ash. It is a place that has served, for centuries, as a dumping ground for the sick, the dying, the unwanted, and the insane. It is an island that has absorbed so much concentrated pain that the land itself seems to scream in a silent, unending agony. Tonight, we will not just visit Poveglia. We will perform an archaeological dig into its timeline, peeling back the layers of its dark history, a history that reads like a catalog of human misery. We will begin not in darkness, but in light, with the island's peaceful origins, a community that once called this place home. Then we will journey into the shadow of the Black Death, when the island was transformed into a lazaretto, a plague quarantine station where tens of thousands of people were sent to die, their bodies burned in massive open-air pits. After that, we will move into the 20th century, when the island's nightmare was reborn with a new, clinical, and even more intimate kind of horror. We will explore its time as a mental asylum, a place where a sadistic doctor allegedly performed horrific experiments on his patients in the high chamber of the bell tower, his own madness culminating in his terrifying demise. And finally, we will listen to the accounts of the very few who have dared to step onto its forbidden shores in the modern era. Paranormal investigators, television hosts, and local Italians who have been brave, or perhaps foolish enough, to break the law and spend time in this heart of darkness. We will hear their stories of disembodied screams that rip through the silence, of being physically assaulted by unseen forces, and of being overwhelmed and even possessed by the tormented spirits that call Poveglia home. As we navigate this timeline of terror, we will be forced to ask the ultimate question. What has happened on this small island to make it so profoundly and uniquely evil? Is it simply a place with a tragic history that inspires fear in those who visit? Or has the sheer, overwhelming concentration of suffering, layered on top of itself for centuries, created something else entirely. A conscious, intelligent, and malevolent entity born from an ocean of pain. So take a deep breath of clean air while you still can. We are about to set foot on Poveglia, the island of no return. Before Poveglia was a synonym for death, it was a home. To understand the depth of its fall, we must first appreciate the height from which it fell. The island's story begins in the year 421 AD, as the Roman Empire crumbled and barbarian hordes, including the Goths and the Huns, swept down the Italian peninsula. The people of the mainland cities of Padua and Este fled for their lives. They sought refuge in the marshy, difficult-to-navigate lagoon, a natural defensive barrier. They settled on the many small islands, and Poveglia, then known as Popillia, was one of them. For several centuries, Poveglia was a peaceful and prosperous community. It was a small but thriving world, independent and self-sufficient. The islanders were primarily fishermen and salt producers. They were governed by their own elected official and were largely left alone by the burgeoning power of nearby Venice. It was, by all accounts, a good place to live. The population grew steadily. Families were raised, churches were built, and life went on, dictated by the gentle rhythm of the tides. The island's fortunes began to change in the 9th century. After a brutal naval blockade of the lagoon, the population of Poveglia was offered as a reward. The Doge of Venice gave the island to the families of 200 loyal servants. They were granted special privileges, exemption from taxes, the right to bake their own bread, and for a time, this new chapter was also a prosperous one. The island became a key defensive outpost, its location strategic for controlling access to the lagoon. But the island's small size and isolation, once its strength, became its vulnerability. In 1379, war broke out between Venice and its maritime rival, Genoa. The Genoese fleet attacked, and Poveglia, lying directly in the path of the invasion, was a primary target. The island was evacuated. Its people were moved to the relative safety of Venice, and the Venetian government built a large, permanent fortification on the island, a structure known as the Octagon, which still stands today. The war eventually ended, but the people of Poveglia never returned. The island was now a military outpost, its days as a peaceful community over forever. For centuries, it lay mostly dormant, a lonely fort in the lagoon, its memory fading. It was waiting for its new purpose. And in the 14th century, that purpose arrived, carried on the backs of rats and the breath of dying men. To understand the curse of Poveglia, you must understand the terror of the Black Death. It is difficult for us, in our modern world of medicine and sanitation, to comprehend the sheer, existential horror that the bubonic plague represented. It was a disease that moved with terrifying speed and horrifying symptoms. It began with a fever, chills, and vomiting. Then came the bubo-grotesque, painful swellings in the lymph nodes of the armpits, neck, and groin, which would turn black and split open, oozing pus and blood. Death was agonizing, and it was swift, often coming within a matter of days. And it was indiscriminate. It took the rich and the poor, the young and the old. It was seen not just as a disease, but as a divine punishment, an apocalyptic cleansing of the world. Venice, as the bustling nexus of trade between East and West, was the gateway through which the plague repeatedly entered Europe. When the plague ships arrived, the city, with its dense population and narrow, crowded canals, was a perfect incubator. The disease would sweep through the city like a wildfire, and the city's response was born of pure, desperate pragmatism. They needed to isolate the sick. They needed a place to put the dying. And they needed a place to dispose of the dead, whose numbers were so great that normal burial was impossible. They needed a place from which there was no escape. They looked out into their lagoon, and their eyes fell on the abandoned, fortified island of Poveglia. The island was officially designated as a lazaretto, a quarantine station, a term that comes from the Venetian patron saint of lepers, Saint Lazarus. But this was no hospital. There was no care, no treatment, no hope. To be sent to Poveglia was to be condemned. The process was brutal. Special plague patrols, often composed of prisoners offered a pardon for this deadly work, would roam the city. If anyone in a house showed even the slightest symptom, a cough, a fever, a telltale bubo, the entire family was doomed. Healthy or not, you were considered contaminated. Imagine the scene. The heavy knock on the door in the middle of the night. The masked figures, their faces hidden behind the terrifying beaked masks of the plague doctors, stuffed with herbs to ward off the miasma. The screams of children, the pleas of parents, all ignored. Families were torn apart, dragged from their homes, and thrown onto barges. The journey across the dark, quiet lagoon to the island was a journey to the underworld. As the shores of Venice receded, so too did all hope. Upon arrival at Poveglia, the horror only intensified. The living were thrown in with the dying. The island became a chaotic mass of human suffering. There was no sanitation, little food or water. The air was thick with the constant sound of wailing, of prayers and curses uttered by people who knew they had been abandoned by God and man. The healthy would watch their loved ones die in agony, knowing that their own turn was only a matter of days away. But Poveglia's primary function was not just to house the dying. It was to dispose of the dead. And the dead were piling up at a rate that was overwhelming. The Venetian solution was as brutal as the plague itself. They dug massive open pits, and into these pits, they threw the bodies layer upon layer. When a pit was full, they would douse it with accelerants and set it ablaze. Day and night, the sky above Poveglia was choked with a thick, greasy, black smoke that could be seen and smelled for miles. It was the smoke of thousands upon thousands of burning human bodies. The island became a crematorium, a funeral pyre on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. It is estimated that over the course of several major plague outbreaks spanning centuries, more than 160,000 people died and were burned on Poveglia. Let that number sink in. 160,000 souls, all ending their lives in terror, pain, and utter despair. Their last moments filled with the sight of the pyres and the smell of their own kind being rendered into ash. That ash settled into the very soil of this tiny island, becoming a part of the land itself. Local legend, passed down through generations of Venetians, claims that the soil on Poveglia is now 50% human ash. While this is likely a morbid exaggeration, it speaks to the profound psychological impact this history has had on the local psyche. The land is not just land. It is a mass grave, place fertilized by death. After the last great plague subsided in the 17th century, the island was once again largely abandoned, its purpose served. But it was no longer just an empty fort. It was now a place of profound terror in the Venetian imagination. It was cursed ground, a place saturated with the anguished spirits of the plague victims. No one would go near it. Fishermen would give its shores a wide berth, whispering stories of seeing strange, dancing lights on the island at night, and hearing the faint, disembodied cries of the suffering carried on the wind across the water. They claimed that the waters around the island were haunted, and that to fish there was to risk pulling up a human jawbone or a blackened rib cage in your nets. For over 200 years, Poveglia was left to its ghosts. The buildings decayed. The fields where the plague pits once burned became overgrown with wild grapes and tangled weeds. The island was silent, save for the lapping of the water and the mournful cries of the gulls. It seemed its story of horror had finally come to an end. But Poveglia's capacity for suffering was not yet exhausted. In the 20th century, its nightmare was about to be reborn, in a new and arguably even more terrifying form. In 1922, the Italian government, in an act of what seems like either profound ignorance or deliberate cruelty, decided to repurpose the island. The existing buildings, including the old church and the imposing bell tower, were converted into a facility for a different kind of outcast, the mentally ill. Poveglia became a psychiatric hospital, an asylum for the insane. On the surface, it might have seemed like a logical, if grim, choice. The island was isolated, a place where the mentally ill could be kept out of sight, out of mind. A common and cruel practice of the era. The setting was even described by some as beautiful, a place of peace and tranquility, far from the noise of the city. But the tranquility was a lie. The asylum on Poveglia was not a place of healing. It was a place of profound psychological and physical torture. A new chapter of human horror written directly on top of the old. The early 20th century was a dark age for mental health treatment. Asylums were often little more than human warehouses, places where patients were subjected to cruel and inhumane conditions. But the hospital on Poveglia quickly developed a reputation among Venetians for being particularly dreadful. Patients sent to the island were not just the severely mentally ill. They were also the socially undesirable, the difficult, the eccentric, the people that society wanted to forget. They were warehoused on this island of death, their own internal psychological torment now amplified and reflected back at them by the oppressive, sorrowful atmosphere of the place. Almost immediately upon opening, the patients began to complain. They reported seeing spectral, shadowy figures, which they believed to be the ghosts of plague victims, walking the halls at night. They heard constant whispers, agonized moans, and blood-curdling screams that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the buildings. They were terrified, but who would believe them? They were, after all, officially insane. Their genuine paranormal experiences were dismissed as mere symptoms of their madness, delusions to be ignored or suppressed with crude medications and restraints. This is where the story of Poveglia takes a turn into the realm of true crime and medical horror. According to the most persistent and terrifying legend associated with the asylum, the hospital was run by a doctor who was more of a monster than a healer. The doctor's name is lost to history, a detail that only adds to his menacing, almost mythical status as a faceless embodiment of clinical evil. He was said to be brilliant, ambitious, arrogant, and utterly without empathy. He became obsessed with the idea that he could find a cure for insanity, and he believed that the key to doing so was through a radical experimental procedure, the transorbital lobotomy. The lobotomy, in its early forms, was a brutal and imprecise practice. It involved inserting a sharp instrument, often little more than an ice pick, through the thin bone of the eye socket and into the brain. The instrument was then wiggled back and forth, severing the connections in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of personality and executive function. The doctor on Poveglia, however, allegedly used even cruder methods. The legend states he didn't bother with the surgical precision of the ice pick. He used hand drills, hammers, and chisels, and he didn't use anesthesia. He would select his victims from the general patient population, often choosing those who were the most vocal about the hauntings, the ones whose terrified rantings about ghosts annoyed him the most. He would have them restrained and dragged from their rooms, up the winding, claustrophobic stairs of the island's tall, imposing bell tower. There, in the belfry, with a panoramic view of the sparkling lagoon and the distant, beautiful city of Venice, he would perform his horrific experiments. The other patients, trapped in the buildings below, could hear the muffled, agonized screams of his victims echoing from the tower, a sound that became a regular, terrifying feature of life and death on the island. The doctor's work was a catastrophic failure. He did not cure anyone. He only created mindless vegetables or corpses. He was a butcher, not a doctor. The legend then culminates in a moment of perfect, Gothic justice. After years of torturing his patients, the doctor himself began to lose his grip on reality. He started complaining to the nurses and staff that he was being haunted, that the ghosts of the plague victims and his own butchered patients were tormenting him relentlessly. He claimed they would whisper to him at night, calling his name, driving him mad. The torturer had become the tortured. His end came, fittingly, in the bell tower, the very site of his atrocities. There are two versions of the story. In one, he was driven so completely insane by the spirits of the island that he climbed to the top of the tower and threw himself off, his own final scream joining the chorus of the damned that he had helped to create. In the other, more sinister version, a group of his patients, driven to a final desperate act of rebellion, managed to overpower him. They dragged him, fighting and screaming, to the top of the tower and threw him off, a final act of vengeance for the horrors he had inflicted upon them. Both versions of the story end with the same chilling detail. As the doctor's body lay shattered on the ground below, a nurse who witnessed the fall claimed that a strange, thick, milky white fog swirled up from the ground and enveloped his body, seeming to enter his mouth and choke the last remnants of life out of him. The island itself, it seemed, was claiming its own, absorbing his malevolent spirit into its already cursed soil. After the doctor's death, the hospital remained open for several more years, its dark reputation now sealed in local lore. But by the 1960s, with the movement towards deinstitutionalization, its time was finally over. In 1968, the asylum was officially closed down. The last of the staff and patients were ferried away, and Poveglia was once again abandoned to its ghosts, now with a new, more modern layer of madness and pain added to its soil of sorrow. Today, Poveglia is strictly forbidden territory. The Italian government prohibits all visitors. The island is patrolled, and anyone caught attempting to land on its shores faces hefty fines and legal trouble. This official prohibition has only fueled the island's dark mystique. But in the age of paranormal television and urban exploration, some have managed to talk their way past the authorities or sneak onto the island under the cover of darkness. And their accounts are uniformly, terrifyingly consistent. One of the first and most famous modern investigations was conducted by the host of the Travel Channel show Ghost Adventures, Zach Bagans. In 2009, his team gained rare permission to spend the night on the island. The resulting episode became legendary in paranormal circles, not for what they saw, but for what they experienced. From the moment they set foot on the island, they claimed to be under a sustained psychic and physical assault. They recorded dozens of disembodied voices on their digital recorders, what paranormal investigators call electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs. The voices were not just whispers. They were aggressive, with one clearly saying in Italian, "Go away," and another telling a female crew member, "I want to kill you." Their equipment malfunctioned constantly. Fresh batteries would drain in minutes, a common report in highly charged locations. The team members complained of feeling dizzy and sick, of being scratched by unseen hands, and of an overwhelming sense of anger and oppression that felt like a physical weight on their chests. The climax of the investigation came when Zach Bagans claimed to have been momentarily possessed by an angry spirit. His personality changed completely. He became aggressive and raged, his eyes filled with a blackness that his crew had never seen before. He had to be physically restrained. He would later describe it as the most intense and malevolent paranormal experience of his career. He left the island utterly convinced that it was not just haunted by individual lingering spirits, but by a single, powerful, demonic entity born from the collective suffering. Other investigators and journalists who have visited have reported similar experiences. A common report is the sound of the bell from the infamous tower, tolling on its own across the lagoon. Even though the bell itself was physically removed decades ago, people have been pushed, shoved, and scratched by unseen forces. They have heard the sounds of splashing water, as if people are drowning in the lagoon just off the shore. And almost everyone who spends any significant amount of time there reports hearing the same terrible symphony. The disembodied, agonizing screams of the tortured, the faint, heartbreaking cries of children, and angry, guttural voices demanding that they leave. Even local Venetians who have never been to the island have their stories, tales that have become part of the city's folklore. One of the most famous modern tales involves a wealthy family who, in the 1980s, reportedly bought the island from the government with the intention of building a lavish holiday home. They spent one night there. They fled in terror before dawn and refused to ever speak in detail about what happened to them on the island. The only detail that ever emerged, a rumor that spread through Venice like wildfire, was that their daughter's face had been ripped open by something on the island, requiring more than 20 stitches to close the wound. The island of Poveglia is a perfect storm of paranormal energy. It is a place that has been systematically and deliberately saturated with the worst aspects of human experience for over 600 years. This leaves us with a profound and terrifying question. What has this unimaginable concentration of suffering created? What is the true nature of the evil on Poveglia? The first and most straightforward explanation is what we can call the psychological priming theory. This is the skeptical view. It argues that there is nothing truly paranormal happening on Poveglia. The island has an undeniably horrific history, and this history creates a powerful expectation of fear. When people visit, especially paranormal investigators who are specifically looking for evidence, their brains are primed to interpret any ambiguous stimuli as paranormal. A creak in a decaying building becomes a footstep. The wind whistling through a broken window becomes a whisper. The feeling of intense fear itself can produce physical symptoms, like nausea, dizziness, or a racing heart. In this view, Poveglia isn't haunted. Its visitors are haunted by its story. This theory is rational and certainly accounts for some of the experience, but it struggles to explain the consistency of the evidence across different groups, especially the physical phenomena like scratches or the specific context-aware EVPs. Our second theory is the classic stone tape theory. This is the idea that the island itself has become a giant psychic recording device. The intense emotional energy of the 160,000 plague victims and the later terror and madness of the asylum patients has been imprinted into the very fabric of the place, the soil, the water, the limestone bricks of the buildings. What people are experiencing is not an intelligent haunting, but a residual one. They are witnessing an environmental playback of past trauma. The screams they hear are the literal echoes of the screams of the dying. The shadowy figures are psychic imprints left behind by the plague victims. This would explain the repetitive nature of some of the phenomena, like the tolling of the phantom bell. If any place on Earth has been saturated with enough emotional energy to create a stone tape recording, it is Poveglia. However, it doesn't fully explain the interactive and seemingly intelligent nature of some of the hauntings. Residual hauntings don't typically push people, or answer direct questions on an EVP, or possess them. This suggests that something more than just a simple recording is at play. This brings us to our third and most terrifying theory, the Legion or Gestalt consciousness hypothesis. This theory proposes that the sheer volume of souls who have died in agony on Poveglia has created something new. The individual spirits of the dead have not just lingered. They have merged. They have coalesced into a single, massive, and malevolent consciousness, a Gestalt entity born of centuries of pain, fear, and rage. This would be the demon that Zach Bagans described. Not a classic demon from religious lore, but something far more elemental and perhaps even more terrifying. A conscious manifestation of human suffering. This entity would be intelligent, powerful, and utterly hostile to the living, whom it would see as intruders on its island of pain. It would have the combined energy of all the souls that compose it, allowing it to physically interact with the world, to speak, to attack, to possess. It would explain why the experiences on the island are not just sad or scary, but actively malevolent and aggressive. Visitors are not just dealing with the ghosts of Poveglia. They are dealing with the ghost of Poveglia, a singular entity with the power and the rage of a legion. This is a profoundly disturbing idea, but it is the one that seems to best fit the unique and extreme nature of the island's reported activity. Poveglia is not just a place where bad things happened. It is a place where so many bad things happened in such a concentrated area, for so long, that the island itself may have become a living monument to human misery, a place that actively, intelligently, and violently hates the living. Poveglia stands today as it has for decades, silent, decaying, and forbidden. It is a scar on the beautiful face of the Venetian lagoon, a place that serves as a grim reminder of the darker aspects of human history. Whether it is a place of profound psychological power, a psychic recording of past traumas, or the home of a monstrous, collective spirit, one thing is certain. The suffering of Poveglia is not over. It is waiting there, in the crumbling buildings and the soil of ash, a testament to the fact that some places are not meant for the living. Some places belong entirely to the dead. And now I want to open the floor to you. What do you believe is the source of the evil on Poveglia? Is it a case of mass hysteria fueled by a dark history? Is it a massive residual haunting? Or do you believe, as some do, that the island is home to a single, powerful, and malevolent entity born of pain? What do you think should be done with the island? Should it be left to rot, a permanent memorial to those who suffered there? Should an attempt be made to cleanse it, to bring peace to the land? Or are some places so broken that they can never be fixed? I want to hear your thoughts and your theories in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into one of the world's most haunted locations to be a journey worth taking, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support is what allows us to continue to shine a light on these dark and forbidden places. And be sure to click that notification bell, so you won't miss our next exploration of the unknown. Thank you for your time. And the next time you see a beautiful, distant island, remember Poveglia. Paradise and prison can sometimes be the same piece of land. It all depends on the ghosts you bring with you.